Okay, the next item of business is the debate on motion 16571 in the name of Lorna Slater on Scottish enterprise funding for arms companies. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible, and I invite Lorna Slater to speak to and move the motion up to 7 minutes. Ms Slater.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I will move the motion in my name lest I forget during my speech. I was very proud to be part of the Scottish Government under First Minister Humza Yousaf when he spoke up so movingly on the plight of the Palestinian people, who were being subject to collective punishment for the brutal atrocities committed on October 7th. The suffering they have endured at the hands of Israeli forces has been horrific. Ordinary citizens, half of them children, have been subject to bombardment for months, deprived of food, water, electricity and medical care in some of the worst war crimes of the 21st century. Tens of thousands of people have been killed. Schools, hospitals and homes have been bombed into rubble. Lives have been cut devastatingly short, and over 1 million people have been displaced. And now, in front of the world, the Trump administration is calling for widespread ethnic cleansing. There are International Criminal Court arrest warrants out for the architects of this crisis and ongoing investigations for breaches of the Genocide Convention. The Scottish Government has rightly spoken strongly against the killing and against Donald Trump's plan. The Scottish Government has been clear in its support for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, something supported by this Parliament back in 2023. Yet since the assault began, the Scottish Government has given over £1 million to companies that have armed Israel and that have enabled this destruction. We can debate the shameful role of the UK Government, which has approved these arms sales to Israel, and I expect there would be a lot of unity among MSPs from across the chamber. Foreign policy is not devolved to Scotland. Scotland can't control what the UK Government does on the world stage. But we can control where our public money goes, and we can control which companies and which industries we choose to support. The principle of our motion is very simple. If a company has profited from the sale of arms and weapons to countries complicit in war crimes and genocide, then it should not receive public money from the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government has said that no public funding should be going to supply arms to Israel, but at least £8 million of Scottish enterprise grants have been awarded to 13 companies involved in arms dealing and manufacturing since 2019. A number of these businesses have directly supplied weapons and equipment to Israel during its assault on Gaza. The Scottish Government must put its money where its mouth is and stand up for human rights. This morning, Oxfam and Amnesty International joined the calls for this funding to be stopped, with Oxfam describing the government's position as morally incoherent. In 2019, the Scottish Greens secured a commitment from the Scottish Government that all Scottish public bodies would conduct human rights checks on companies, including arms companies, before funding them. In November 2023, The Ferret revealed that despite Scottish Enterprise having conducted 199 human rights checks, not a single firm had failed, despite some having armed states that have been widely accused of war crimes, including Israel and Saudi Arabia. Amnesty International has called the current human rights due diligence process inadequate and states that it is failing to ensure that Scotland is upholding its international obligations. If companies who are arming war crimes are not beyond the pale, then who is? The Scottish Government may say that its hands are tied, but it has rightly introduced measures against companies who trade with Russia following the invasion of Ukraine. So why is Israel different? When we invest public money in our economy, We have a responsibility to use it to shape the kind of future we want to see, to invest in the kind of organisations who share our vision for a fairer and greener future. And it should go without saying, companies that are not profiting from human suffering or the kind of war crimes that we have seen in the last 15 months. It is not honest for the Scottish Government to dismiss this by saying that the grants don't go directly towards weapons or munitions manufacturing. What is the moral distinction between funding the bomb and funding the bomb factory? The Scottish Government is still choosing to give public money to companies who profit from the sale of arms and technology which are currently being used by the IDF to commit human rights abuses in Gaza. BAE, Raytheon and Leonardo have all received grants from Scottish Enterprise. All three of them have been involved in arms sales to Israel, but also to Saudi Arabia, who used them to inflict a humanitarian crisis on the people of Yemen. Those arms sales were found to have been granted illegally by the Court of Appeal in 2019. Many of these companies are reporting mega profits, with BAE reporting £3 billion worth of profits last year alone, profiting from human suffering. Our public money increasing suffering and misery, instead of building a fairer and better world. It isn't at all clear to me that mega corporations who rake in that kind of profit need public money at all. BAE, for example, is already the biggest arms company in Europe, Raytheon the second biggest in the world. Scottish public money would be better spent on supporting small businesses, cooperative businesses, social enterprises and rural businesses. Scotland's small, clean energy, nature restoration and organic food businesses could have made very good use of that money. In conclusion, the Scottish Government has clearly called for an end to all UK arms sales to Israel. But Scottish public money is still being used, granted to companies complicit with the manufacturing of arms used by Israel. The Scottish Government must urgently overhaul the human rights due diligence process to ensure that every penny of public money handed out by Scottish Enterprise goes to making the world a better, fairer place in which human lives and human rights are respected. Many of my colleagues here in this chamber today have backed calls for a ceasefire and condemned the destruction in Gaza. I hope they will join me in saying enough is enough and calling on the Scottish Government to end all public funding to companies complicit in the arms trade with Israel.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder, as ever with these debates, there is next to no time in hand, so members will be expected to stick to their time allocation. And I call on Richard Lochhead to speak to and move Amendment 16571.3. Minister, up to 5 minutes, please.
Deputy Presiding Officer, given the backdrop to today's important debate, it's important that we recognise there will be much discussed today that does unite us all. And of course, this debate provides an appropriate opportunity for this Parliament to reiterate its unwavering support for the ceasefire in Gaza and to call for every effort to be made in order to ensure that that ceasefire is extended. And Parliament should be proud, and Lorna Slater referred to this, of the humanitarian assistance that the Scottish Government has provided to the people of Gaza, and join us in calling once again for the recognition of a Palestinian state and a two-state solution. Our debate also comes in a week that we mark the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's a time for remembering those who have sadly lost their lives as a result of Russian aggression, and it's a time for reaffirming, as the First Minister said earlier this week, that Scotland stands as part of a united front that supports the independence of Ukraine and seeks to secure peace and deter any future Russian aggression.
Ross Greer.
Very grateful for the Minister for taking the intervention, and I agree with his words absolutely on Ukraine. On the 3rd of March 2022, the Scottish Government sent a clear instruction to businesses in Scotland. They said stop trading with Russia and asked them to show solidarity with Ukraine. Not just arms companies, but all businesses. Given that no equivalent instruction has been sent in relation to Israel, could the Minister explain why the Scottish Government apparently thinks Israel's assault on Gaza is less severe, less significant than Russia's assault on Ukraine?
Minister.
If the member will just be patient a little bit, I'm just about to come to the consistency in the way we do approach those matters in terms of due diligence over human rights issues. And I should say the atrocity of October the 7th, 2023, and the subsequent unspeakable events in Gaza and the loss of so many lives and the war in Ukraine are tragedies of an unimaginable scale, and we must be united in our efforts to condemn the aggressors and support those who strive for peace. But they also act as a reminder of how fragile peace can be, of the uncertainties in our world and the continuing threat to democratic freedoms that we hold so dear and precious. Now, this government has consistently called for an end to all arms sales from UK companies, including Scottish companies, to Israel, and we do not believe that public funding should go towards supplying arms to Israel. This is a position we should reaffirm and reinforce today. I'll give way.
John Mason, briefly.
I thank the Minister for giving way, but I mean, if Iran is still able to arm and produce arms and for export, surely it is unfair to stop Israel defending itself.
Minister, and give you the time back for it.
Well, I've already outlined the backdrop in which this debate takes place and where we should hopefully unify across many key principles, and I hope the member would support those key principles. But while it's currently the responsibility of the UK Government to issue licences for the export of arms, I also believe we should be clear and united in our calls for them to use their powers to stop the exports of arms to Israel and protect the lives of those who have suffered so much. As the Government's amendment states, the focus should be on extending the ceasefire, securing the release of the remaining hostages and ensuring that humanitarian aid reaches the people of Gaza. It also outlines the support for a two-state solution and calls on the UK Government to officially recognise the State of Palestine to break the political impasse that has condemned Israelis and Palestinians to successive cycles of violence. The Green Motion does not address the wider backdrop against which we debate today, and of course the Government believes these issues should be aired and voted upon today as well. But I do of course appreciate that they have been consistent in their support for a recognised Palestinian state as well. I am of course aware of the concerns expressed about the support that Scottish Enterprise provides to companies which have involvement in the defence sector here in Scotland. Scottish Enterprise operates a human rights due diligence process in the way it awards any funding, including of course the companies in the defence sector. It does not provide funding for the manufacture of weapons or munitions in line with the long-standing policy of this Government. And we have fulfilled the commitments that Lorna Slater referred to, given back, I think she said, in 2019. The due diligence process is designed to ensure that public funds are not directed to companies that engage in activities that contravene international law or human rights standards. The checks involve an assessment of each company's operations and are cross-referenced against a number of independent resources. Any awarding of grants follows careful scrutiny and assurances that the companies in question meet the required ethical standards and pass the due diligence checks. Scottish Government funding is largely directed towards the diversification away from core defence activities that's given to many of the companies that are being discussed in the context of this debate. We must also acknowledge that Scotland benefits from being, of course, home to the highly skilled industries that contribute to national and international security at the same time. However, I do appreciate the concerns raised and the calls for Scottish Enterprise to review its human rights due diligence checks to ensure they do take into account of where product ends use is. That's why we will support the Labour Party amendments in order to ensure that the due diligence process is always as robust as it can possibly be. Our amendment speaks to the values that this Government holds. It includes, as I said before, a call for peace in Gaza, for humanitarian aid and a lasting two-state solution. It urges the UK Government to suspend arms exports to Israel and a clear and unequivocal message that this Parliament does not believe in any public funding should be going towards the supply of arms to Israel. I move the amendment.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Craig Hoy to speak to and move Amendment 16571.1 up to 4 minutes. Mr.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I move the amendment in my name? And can I also echo the comments of Richard Lockhead in welcoming a peace solution, if it holds in the Middle East? Sometimes motions such as today force members to pick sides. So let me tell the Greens whose side the Scottish Conservatives are on. We are on the side of the young engineering apprentices working in a legitimate industry, which is a vital part of Scotland's economy. We are on the side of the aerospace and defence industries, who are investing in creating the skilled engineering jobs needed to develop new defence technologies. We are not on the side of the Greens, who used a protest outside this Parliament to intimidate young apprentices as they attempted to attend an outreach event to promote the importance of developing STEM skills in the Scottish economy. I don't have time to give way. The Scottish Greens say they defend the planet, but sometimes we have to ask which planet is it that they are defending, and this motion today begs that question again. Because we all know that international actors can be unpredictable. That is why Scotland, as part of the UK, must remain at the cutting edge of aerospace and defence manufacturing. Whether it's renewables, automotives or defence, the future of this world is engineered, and it is entirely legitimate to use our engineering capabilities to deliver what's needed to defend ourselves and our allies from the malignancy of nations such as Russia or the evil terrorist forces such as Hamas. Deputy Presiding Officer, the Green MSPs wear badges saying they stand with Ukraine, including equipping it. But what is it that President Zelensky is asking for when he travels the world? Ukraine cannot defend itself with warm words alone. Ukraine is asking the UK for the military equipment made by the very same manufacturers that the Green Party is protesting against. Ukraine needs cutting-edge military capabilities. That's weapons and munitions, and hopefully Scottish-engineered weapons and munitions. Green MSPs need to get into the real world, or I warn them that they will be living in a far more dangerous world. I don't have time. A world where we would see more Russian aggression on former satellite states and more unwarranted attacks on the freedom and lives as those experienced by Israel at the hands of Hamas. So when the Greens say they stand with Ukraine, it means nothing. Nothing unless they end their dogmatic and depressing campaign against the legitimate defence industry operating in Scotland today. And if their issue is with how the hardware and technology could be used overseas, then they should take their case to the UK Export Control Joint Unit, not the young Scottish men and women seeking to forge an engineering career. And I warn them that protests at careers fairs and outside Scottish factories of Leonardo or Raytheon only means that the jobs they support go overseas to countries who do not have as tight export controls as we do. Now, the Scottish defence sector doesn't just make sure that the world is a safer place, it also contributes to our economic security and our economic stability. The ADS sector employs 35,000 people in Scotland and accounts for £3.2 billion to the economy, delivering 1,500 much-needed apprenticeships. But the signals being sent to the industry are far from positive or progressive. So I ask this question of ministers. Who decreed that Scottish Enterprise will only provide funding to help firms diversify towards non-military applications for their technology? And why specifically? And why will Scottish Enterprise not support defence skills and defence jobs which could then be used in other areas? Deputy Presiding Officer, we cannot afford to lose this sector. We must therefore work with the industry to make sure the Scottish Government supports further and higher education skills so that it can sustain this sector now and into the future. Scotland, in conclusion, should and could be proud of its aerospace and defence industries and the many people who work within it. And it is sad to see the Green Party seeing it fit to bring forward such a malign form of political debate into this Parliament today.
Thank you. I now call on Daniel Johnson to speak to and move Amendment 16571.2. Again, up to 4 minutes. Mr Johnson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. This is an important debate, but it's one that I think that we need to approach with maturity because, in all honesty, I think there are things being said that have been said already this afternoon on all sides that I can agree with, and I think actually it's important to step through that. And I very much welcome Richard Lochhead's approach to this debate. This has to be about principles, and if I can set out mine. I think, first of all, this has to be about Gaza. I don't think you can look at what has happened at Gaza in any way condone or support what has happened at this point. And I say that as someone who, after the atrocities of October the 7th, was clear that Israel had the right to defend itself. But I think what has happened there is really, truly horrific. And I don't think that we can be seen to use our public money in supporting that. But unfortunately, and this is where Craig Hoy is right, you cannot separate those issues and those of the defence sector from the very real and present danger we face right now in this country. We live in unparalleled and unprecedented times. Certainly, I'm afraid I don't have time, but yes, I need to make some progress. And we have to understand what that will take. And indeed, I thought Keith Brown yesterday in the budget debate made some of those points very well. But we also need to recognise there is wider economic impact from these companies and the ones that we cannot ignore, one in which we have benefits. So let me, if I may, step through each of the party's motions. So I very much welcome the Greens giving us this opportunity. I think it's important that we have this full and frank debate. I also completely agree with them in terms of the seriousness of the situation that we face in Gaza. And indeed, I think there are those who may argue that this isn't a matter for this Parliament, that the export control mechanisms should be all that we looked at. But I don't think that's good enough. I don't think that we can say our politics just stop at the border. I think we need to ensure and be confident that the money we're spending is in line with the values we espouse. So they're right to bring up these questions, and that's reflected in our amendment. But likewise, I think the Scottish Government are correct. I think to outline the processes that are in place. And indeed, I very much welcome the Scottish Government's emphasis on the two-state solution, because above all else, I think it's absolutely vital that we look at how can we bring that about, because ultimately I think that's the only way that we can have peace and stability in the Middle East. But also I think we need to look at what has been supported. And having spent much time at both Babcock and Rosyth, but also BAE Systems in Scotstoun, and thinking about the investment in the Skills Academy at Scotstoun, that is about providing the skills for the people that will build the warships that will keep our sea lanes safe and keep this country safe. Skills which will also have effects beyond that. So I think we have to support the activity and the investments that are being made by Scottish Enterprise and the enterprise agencies, and we cannot ignore them, albeit those are difficult. But I would also come to the Conservative motion. Now, my issue with their amendment is that it completely removes Gaza from consideration, and that just really can't be right. But what I would say is that they are absolutely correct. At a time when the US has made very clear that we cannot rely upon their resources to defend this country, when we have Ukraine, war in Europe, on our doorstep, and we may well be asked to put boots on the ground in order to protect that peace. We have to have the industries and the capability to build the ships that we need, to build the radars for the aircraft that will keep our skies safe, and to provide the communications equipment so that those troops on the ground that may well be asked to keep that peace in Ukraine can do so with the equipment and resources that they need, because that's what the defence sector in this country, in Scotland, provides. And I'll close there. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. And I call on Alex Cole-Hamilton again, up to 4 minutes. Mr Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to Lorna Slater for making time for this important debate today. And it brings me up against an aspect of my life I don't often talk about in this chamber, and that is my Quakerism. And I've spent a great deal of my adult life campaigning against aspects and aims of the arms trade. But that said, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine added layers of complexity to my thinking on this that I'm still grappling with, because I do believe that in order for peace to be sustained throughout the world, and in that region in particular, we do need to arm Ukraine. So it is a nuanced issue for me. I'll unpack some of that later. But what I do absolutely agree with the spirit of the Green Party motion today is what is happening in Gaza, because what the people of Gaza have endured over these past 16 months is unimaginable. Homes destroyed, communities shattered, loved ones lost. And when last month the ceasefire finally emerged between Israel and Hamas, it was announced, it represented a huge moment of hope after many months of darkness and despair for that entire region. It meant that the work of flooding Gaza with the aid which had been desperately needed and deprived of for months was able to begin in earnest. And I want to take this opportunity to reiterate my party's support for that ceasefire, which is so vital to the well-being of the Palestinian people. And we want that ceasefire to continue and for all of the hostages to be released. It has been troubling in recent weeks, and we've heard some of this today, to hear Donald Trump's unhinged calls for the Palestinian people to be relocated out of Gaza entirely and for that land to become the so-called Riviera of the Middle East. It goes without saying that those plans are not only ludicrous, but they would cause chaos in a region which is already so unstable and would amount to a flagrant violation of international law. Instead, we need to redouble our efforts to build a lasting peace, regardless of how remote that possibility feels right now. That begins with the recognition of a Palestinian state on 1967 boundaries and a two-state solution that is the only way to deliver the dignity and the security which both Israelis and Palestinians deserve. I'll now turn to the issue of arms exports. As early as April last year, Liberal Democrats called for the UK government to suspend the supply of arms exports to Israel. Liberal Democrats have many years now called for tougher controls on the export of armaments to ensure they are not used for potential human rights breaches and atrocities. We support the introduction of a presumption of denial for all governments listed in the FCDO Human Rights and Democracy Report as human rights priorities, and as such, we accordingly believe that arms exports to Israel should be halted. In terms of Scottish enterprise funding, we need to ensure that the current human rights due diligence checks are as robust as they possibly can be, and it's worth remembering the origins of the checks that this chamber now insists upon. Indeed, a cross-government human rights due diligence test was only introduced after my party helped uncover what went on behind a deal that Nicola Sturgeon personally signed with China Railway No. 3 Engineering Group during a meeting at Bute House. No due diligence was done whatsoever. And it was discovered, presiding officer, that CR3 had been blacklisted by the Norwegian's state pension fund for gross corruption and were found by Amnesty International to have connections to human rights abuses. Do I have time in hand, presiding officer?
No, just not.
I'm afraid I can't on this occasion. So Scottish Liberal Democrats helped force the introduction of new rules, but in 2022, when they then uncovered that at least 49 public bodies in Scotland were still unaware of the Scottish human rights tests following those deals. That's a very strange and outrageous place to be, and that included Crown Estate Scotland, which has just run the massive Scotland auction. So we do have concerns about how robust those due diligence checks are in practice. However, we must also recognise that defence is a reserved matter. It is for the UK government to set the rules on arms exports and to ensure that the system is robust and that we're meeting our international obligations. It would be inappropriate and ineffective to create a backdoor system to arms regulation here in Scotland. And whilst I understand it's not the aim of the Greens motion, I fear it would be the outcome.
Thank you, Mr Cole-Hamilton. We now move to open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. I call Maggie Chapman to be followed by Hamza Youssef.
Thank you. Politics is about the particular, and it's right that in this motion we are calling for something specific, tangible and measurable, and entirely achievable. There is no excuse for not answering that call. But political integrity is also about the broader picture, the deeper truths, the longer pages of history. The anguish of Palestine did not begin in October 2023. It was not then that people were first ripped from their land, had their homes first bulldozed, their trees uprooted, their pathways blocked, their writers disappeared, their children killed with swift or slow violence. By that measure of history, we in the global north have failed. Yes, some of us have failed worse than others. We can weigh the complicity of Washington, of Westminster, of Brussels, of Berlin. But knowing what we know, seeing what we see, and we do see it unless we choose to turn away, why do the words for what is done, apartheid, genocide, stick so timidly in our throats? Why, when international law is broken so brutally, so blatantly, and our constituents protest at the pain of Palestine, protest without violence, for peace, for food, for lives, why do our police, our prosecutors, our courts single them out for such exemplary punishment? We can't blame the public this time. Labour and the Democrats both know that. Thousands of voters chose independent MPs because this mattered more to them than anything else. Donald Trump was elected because Democratic voters stayed at home, and the issue, more than any other, that kept them there was Gaza. 20 years ago, Desmond Tutu and Jimmy Carter were both talking about Palestine and Israel. They were not afraid to speak of what they saw, to recognise its reality and to call it by its name. In 2006, Carter said of the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem, and I quote, "There, apartheid exists in its most despicable forms, that Palestinians are deprived of basic human rights." And Tutu recognised that it isn't enough just to have the right sentiments. We need to take the right actions too. And that means boycott, divestment and sanctions. In 2014, he said, Those who continue to do business with Israel, who contribute to a sense of normalcy in Israeli society, are doing the people of Israel and Palestine a disservice. They are contributing to the perpetuation of a profoundly unjust status quo. And now that status quo is even more unjust. The death of a child is a grief we can know about, we can understand, one we've probably shared or seen. We've held our arms out to the broken and wept for their loss. But tens upon tens of thousands? Can our minds, can our hearts stretch that far? Is it the very scale of the agony that makes us turn away? Perhaps it is. Perhaps we could just follow one family, what used to be a family, now just a woman and her husband, walking back through Gaza after the ceasefire. They aren't going home. They have no home left to go to. They aren't looking for its remains in the rest of the rubble. They are only looking in the bleak annihilation for the bodies of their 2 children. This is why people stand in burning rage or silent vigil in city squares across the world. This is why they march or climb or paint or speak upon whatever platform they can find until they are silenced. This is why we are here this afternoon. We are here for accountability, for integrity, for justice, for peace. We are here for Palestine.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call Hamza Youssef to be followed by Jackson Carlo.
Can I thank the Greens for bringing this important debate to the Chamber today, and let me say from the very offset that I support their calls to end all arms sales to Israel and agree that not a penny of public funding should be going to arms companies, including those in Scotland, who supply weapons or munitions to Israel. Presiding Officer, some have suggested that we are at the beginnings of a new world order. I would suggest it resembles more disorder than order. We are living at a time when one of our closest allies, who were once on the same side as us in World War II, were on Monday of this week in the UN on the side of dictators in Russia, North Korea and Belarus. It seems whether you choose to invade Ukraine or kill 18,000 children in Gaza, you can now do so with impunity. And in the absence of any rules-based order, then anarchy will ensue. And I would suggest that anarchy and chaos in a world with over 12,000 nuclear warheads poses a very real existential threat to humanity. For those who still believe in a rules-based order, like I suspect all of us in this chamber, then now is the time to ensure that we are, at a minimum, complying with international law and supporting its equal application across the world. And that is just one reason I support calls to halt all arms sales to Israel. Let me remind this chamber that Israel is a nation that is currently headed by a man who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, including using starvation as a method of warfare. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also wanted for crimes against humanity, including murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. How can we possibly claim to be a bastion of democracy, a standard-bearer of international law and human rights, when we are supplying weapons to the man who the highest court in the world has demanded faces trial for war crimes? We must choose accountability, not complicity. Presiding Officer, I've just touched upon what I think is the legal case for why we should end arms sales to Israel. Let me end my contribution by mentioning the moral case. The Conservative amendment in front of us today mentions Israel's right to self-defence, but nothing about the Palestinians' right to self-defence. No right of self-defence for the people, like my wife's 95-year-old grandmother, who was kicked out of her house in 1948, alongside over 700,000 other Palestinians. Their homes, of course, given away by the British, their land occupied by Israel. No self-defence for those who have lived under armed occupation for decades, who continue to see the eradication of their land, the erasure of their culture and their identity as people. Is there anyone who sincerely believes that Israel's retaliation to those horrific attacks on October the 7th is proportionate and in self-defence? Was Israel defending itself from 5-year-old Hind Rajab when they massacred her with 335 bullets? Was Israel defending itself from 2-year-old Layla al-Khatib when an Israeli sniper shot and killed her while she was eating dessert with her grandparents? Was Israel defending itself from 4-day-old twins, Asil and Asar, when killing them in an airstrike while their father was registering their births? Presiding Officer, this isn't self-defence, it is slaughter. And our arms companies, our governments and our nations must play no part in it.
Thank you, Mr Yousaf. I now call Jackson Carlaw to be followed by Katie Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I immediately say that one of the things I most regret, actually, in a debate that I suppose is perfectly reasonable that we should have, is that the affection and respect I have for Hamza Yousaf means that we inevitably find ourselves probably in different positions in this, when actually I think we would probably, as we have in the past, prefer to work together to try to find solutions. I suppose, I don't know whether it's necessary, but maybe I should, since some people write to me in these matters, declare that one of my sons married into the Jewish community in the autumn of last year. That has absolutely no bearing on my thinking of these issues, which is what's been suggested to me by a number of people. I've grown up, as everybody here knows, with the Jewish community, and I've met many of those people who have family and friends in Israel, and I understand the need for the state of Israel. It remains the case, I believe, that there are more Muslims in Israel than there are Jews in the whole of the European continent put together. I wonder why that is, because we exterminated them all. So I find this a miserable motion. I applaud Richard Lochhead's amendment. I'm sorry that the final line of it means that I can't support it, but I think it seeks to bring a measure of reason to what is a very difficult discussion, at times which it is impossible to be reasonable about. And I remain a critical friend of the State of Israel. I have in this chamber previously said that it's not possible at times to support or associate oneself with the actions of the State of Israel, while even at the same time recognising and demanding it should have its right to defend itself. And some of the actions, if we're looking for a solution to things in the long term, of recent weeks, where not even the Nazis paraded the coffins of children around while cheering on the dead bodies that they were passing around the street. The de-Hamasification of Gaza will ultimately be the only route that leads to a more lasting peace. But that possibly is a debate beyond the one today, maybe a morally inconvenient debate, to quote from Lorna Slater, perhaps in a moment. The reality, of course, is that the number of arms that this country is involved in directly in supplying to Israel is minuscule. And yet, Mr Greer on a megaphone, encouraging people to shout, "Jackson Carlaw, you can't hide, you're committing genocide," to me and a whole lot of 16-year-old apprentices who were here on the 21st of February last year to attend a reception celebrating their contribution as apprentices, to be jostled, to be spat at and to be personally accused of committing genocide was absolutely reprehensible. And I don't see how any of that assists in any way in the argument that exists before us. The fundamental concern ultimately is that we know, people chant this, from the river to the sea. That is the policy of Iran. The policy of Iran is to eliminate the state of Israel. If we were to deny Israel the arms to defend itself, which, yes, others can argue in different context, in a different way, then we risk, frankly, encouraging Iran, which is currently on the retreat, after all, with the defeat of Hezbollah in Lebanon and elsewhere. We encourage Iran to the view that it can move against the state of Israel and potentially proliferate an even greater conflict and an even greater war. And for that reason, it remains to me fundamental that Israel be allowed to defend itself. I only finish with the words of Lorna Slater last week at First Minister's questions. I think they're apposite. Disinformation is playing an increasingly dangerous role in our communities and our global politics. Promoting lies and misinformation at home and abroad can have serious consequences for all our communities. Does the First Minister agree that political leaders everywhere must stand up to disinformation? If only.
Thank you, Mr Carlow. I call Katie Clark, to be followed by Ben McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the motion that has been put forward by the Greens today and will vote for it if we are given the opportunity later today. And I also welcome the indication from the Scottish Government that they will support the Scottish Labour amendment to review due diligence checks. I think it is fitting that we are debating the funding of companies who supply arms and munitions used in human rights abuses in Gaza. This Parliament has previously voted for a ceasefire, and I hope today that a clear message will be made in support of international law and that it is unacceptable that government agencies should give financial support to companies who supply arms which risk being used as part of multiple and repeated contraventions of international law, which have been and are taking place in Gaza and indeed the West Bank. In relation to the companies specifically referred to in the motion, we know that Leonardo manufactured 30 Iomarchi M345 aircraft for the Israeli Air Force, and that Raytheon supplies smart bombs for the IDF, weapons that are amongst the most lethal targeting technologies to have been used on Gaza's so-called safe zones. We know these companies are amongst a string of US arms firms who have seen dramatic jumps in their stock prices from the onset of the war, and indeed executives of firms who have described the last 14 months as a business opportunity. Since 2021, of the 199 human rights checks conducted by Scottish Enterprise, and indeed the 178 checks conducted between 2019 and 2020, not a single company has failed. This includes companies, for example, named by the European Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights for potential complicity in unlawful airstrikes in Limon. The test applied by the UK Government in relation to arms export licences is whether the use of a component is likely to lead to the abuse of human rights or be used in a way which is in breach of international law. And we know that the targeting of civilians, of facilities such as hospitals, the bombardment of Gaza, the illegal settlements in the West Bank, the use of white phosphorus and the blockade of essential supplies are amongst the breaches of international law which have taken place in Gaza and the West Bank. According to FOI responses from Amnesty International, the due diligence process carried out by Scottish Enterprise measures the checks it performs on a company only against the level of financial support it receives, rather than its involvement or links to human rights abuses, and seems to be a due diligence process which goes against the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights and neglects consideration of the end use of components, which is the central issue. I therefore listened with interest to Richard Lockhart's contribution in relation to this, and I very much hope that as a result of this debate and the focus that it has brought on this issue, that the Government will ensure that there is a full review of the due diligence processes used by Scottish Enterprise. This Parliament must be clear in the message that we sent, that we will honour international law, we stand in support of human rights and with the people of Palestine.
Thank you, Ms Clark. And I call Ben McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak today as well, although it's a shame we don't have more time this afternoon to spend on this important topic, arguably the most important topic of our time. As others have done, first of all, I would want to again condemn the Israeli government's actions and military operations since the 7th of October 2023, and indeed some of a lot of what the Israeli government have done in the region before then. The attacks on the 7th of October 2023 were, of course, brutal and horrific, but the devastating and also just so immorally horrific and unethical, totally disproportionate military response by the Israeli government and the IDF is just something that will scar this time in history for so many decades to come, and has such a devastating impact on the people of Palestine and those affected. 45,000, according to the UN, Palestinians have been killed in that time. That's the equivalent of half my constituents. If you talked about earlier about the more numbers, sometimes it's hard to relate. Think about that, half of one of our constituencies, and tens of thousands of more injured. And all of this, of course, is subject to legal consideration. And I pay tribute to somebody from Scotland who is the head of legal for UNRWA, who has been documenting this through that period. And I do hope, as has been articulated by my colleague in front of me, who has shown tremendous leadership on this issue, not just domestically, but of course internationally, I hope we do see the time where international law is upheld. Because international law is the only mechanism that we can see resolution, along with humanity and negotiation and mediation, to this, the most challenging issue of not just the 20th century and the 21st century, but times past. So the ceasefire right now, of course, is welcome in terms of being a breathing space, but the proposals from President Trump are just, it's hard to put into words how unconscionable they are. A president of the United States in the 21st century proposing ethnic cleansing. I mean, how do you even contemplate that? It's just, it creates such a sense of hopelessness. But the solidarity that there is with those suffering, we've seen that on the streets of Scotland, and I pay tribute to all my constituents who've been showing solidarity with those who've been affected. And all of those, including my party and the Scottish Government, and across the political spectrum, who've called for ceasefire from the early days since this period of the conflict began, and who've condemned the actions that are disproportionate and the immorality of both Hamas and the IDF in this situation. Now, the question of the funding by Scottish Enterprise, it's been clarified that it doesn't go towards munitions, but I understand why there is a focus on making sure that is absolutely stringently abided by. And as the MSP where
the member's about to conclude,
Leonardo is located, I can say that I will continue engaging with them to make sure that going forward they do not have a direct engagement with those who are engaging in the IDF, who are engaging in this these abhorrent acts elsewhere in the world to our fellow human beings.
Thank you, Mr Macpherson. We will now move to closing speeches, and I call on Paul Sweeney to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I must say I've been moved by the thoughtful contributions from all sides of the Chamber this afternoon. And I also pay tribute to all the people who have been needlessly killed in the tragedy of war, which intensified in Israel and Palestine after the horrific pogrom of October 7th, 2023, and the brutal, disproportionate campaign of retaliation against the Palestinian people that amounts to collective punishment. And it was welcome that the British Government suspended the processing of arms export licences to Israel in September of last year. It's also important that we, at all levels of government, uphold our international obligations. As someone who worked as an account manager at Scottish Enterprise prior to my election to Parliament, I agree that Scottish Enterprise should carry out appropriate due diligence checks so that we can be sure that state aid is not used to facilitate defence sales to states that are suspected of committing war crimes. And the process should be reviewed to minimise the risk that products manufactured and exported from Scotland may be used in breaches of the law of armed conflict. Deputy Presiding Officer, we should also consider the products that the UK Ministry of Defence and UK defence contractors import from Israel and look to reduce those imports in favour of strengthening our domestic industrial base. The motion before us today fails to acknowledge the importance of the aerospace, defence, maritime and security industries in Scotland, the highly skilled, well-paid, unionised, advanced manufacturing jobs that it supports, and the central role they have in both our national defence and the collective defence of the NATO alliance. All the state aid that is in question today has supported projects that do just that. Take the state-of-the-art Applied Shipbuilding Academy at Scotstoun, for example, in Glasgow, which received a grant of £360,000 from Scottish Enterprise. This new facility will allow apprentices to gain hands-on experience with mock-up ships, as well as giving them access to cutting-edge STEM innovation labs. The Shipbuilding Academy is intended not just to be a BE Systems asset company I also worked for, but a facility which will be open to the entire shipbuilding industry in Scotland and its wider supply chain, and it will guarantee a thriving shipbuilding industry in this country for years to come. Crucially, this Applied Shipbuilding Academy will bolster national capabilities and support the continued growth of what is the largest manufacturing industry in Glasgow and the west of Scotland, supporting more than 3,200 jobs. The shipyards in Govan and in Scotstoun in Glasgow have operated since 1864 and 1906 respectively, and in that time they have never exported any naval ships to the State of Israel. Members on the Green Benches should be careful not to demonise shipyard workers in an industry synonymous with Glasgow and critical to our national security. And as the member for Eastwood mentioned, abusing apprentice shipbuilding workers outside this Parliament last year was a mark of shame. Before Christmas, I visited Govan Shipyard for the steel cutting ceremony of HMS Sheffield. I also note in the constituency of the Right Honourable Member for Glasgow Pollock. And I would encourage members to visit Glasgow shipyards and see the work they are undertaking for the Royal Navy, work that is critical to our national security in an increasingly volatile geopolitical environment. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, European countries must do more for their own defence in the face of increasing aggression from Russia and other expansionist regimes, with scant regard for national sovereignty and international rules of cooperation to preserve peace. This is not the time to weaken our defence industry, which is the logical endpoint of the Green Motion, but to strengthen our defence capabilities and industrial base 35 years on from the end of the Cold War. And whilst the Scottish Government should ensure there is no link between Scottish Enterprise grant funding and defence exports to Israel and other states suspected of war crimes, Scottish Enterprise should absolutely be playing its part in bolstering our aerospace, defence, maritime and security industries, which support thousands of jobs and underpin our sovereign defence capability.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. I now call on Jamie Green to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. There are two events of the past week which say more about the conflict in the Middle East than any speech or motion today. The first was the sickening sight of the tiny black coffins paraded on our TV screens of Kafir and Ariel Bibier, 9 months and 4 years old when they were kidnapped and murdered by Hamas. Their lifeless bodies were paraded around the streets by gun-toting, masked men. How very brave of them. How very brave of those men, brandishing their guns, covering their faces. Too afraid to show the world what a monster really looks like, in my view. Along with their mother, Shiri, their deaths added to the 1,200 Israelis killed on or after October 7th. They say that the smallest coffins are the heaviest. How true. But yet the coffins are even smaller and heavier yet in Gaza. In the last 7 days alone, 6 babies have died of the conditions that they find themselves in. Nighttime temperatures are plummeting in Palestine, and the tiny hearts of these babies have given up, which is no surprise. They're living in tents, and their healthcare system has collapsed. They are added to the grim total of 50,000 killed in Gaza. What do they have in common, Presiding Officer? They're children, they're innocent, they did not elect Netanyahu, they did not join Hamas, but they're all dead. Today's debate might be an economic one, but nowhere in the motion is any of this horror acknowledged. There is no call for peace. There is no acceptance of the horrors of October 7th. And fundamentally, but unsurprisingly, there is no mention of Israel's very right to exist at all. One has to question that. I have made myself clear in the past, but if it's not clear enough, I'll do it again. I am neither pro-Israel nor pro-Palestine, as many would seek to hope for. I am pro-both. And the reason for that is because I am pro-peace. Because I believe that we are all human. No one chooses to be kidnapped from their homes, just as no one chooses to have their child shot by a sniper. Now, the fact that successive UK governments, first Conservative and then Labour, support Israel's right to defend its very existence to the tune of less than 1% of Israel's entire imports of defence is, of course, something that's up for valid debate, whatever your views on that. And let's be honest, the United Kingdom shares some responsibility in this whole sorry saga, something which stretches way back before the Balfour Declaration. But whether we like it or not, the defence industry exists, not just in Scotland or the UK, but across Europe and the world. It is a $100 billion industry in the UK. But what I ask is, what does the Green Party want to do about it? What are they suggesting? The mass expulsion of all these companies, of Leonardo, of BAE, of Babcock, of Raytheon, of Thales? Do they want to just simply shut down the arms industry? If that's the case, that's fine. If that's your ideological view. If that be so, then as has been said, how do we arm Ukraine? How do we arm our partners? You cannot cry selective morality over the arms industry to pick and choose the political campaigns that you do or do not support. You must be honest with people on that. And in closing, I want to make this final point. The motion doesn't say it, but let's be honest with each other. This motion today is deep-rooted in the BDS movement. The mask slipped very early on in some of the contributions we had. It doesn't say, let's not do business with Israel on arms. What it does want to say is, let's not do business with Israel at all. And let's not pretend it. And I don't know why you're applauding, because it is that sort of movement that led to 1930s Germany and the Holocaust, Ross Greer, and you should be ashamed of it.
Members!
I would simply close and say this. Put your hand up if you're uncomfortable with what's happened and the actions of the IDF in the last year and a half. I'll be the first to put my hand up. But also put your hand up and be honest if you question Israel's very right to existence. Be honest with the world.
Thank you, Mr Green. I now call Kate Forbes, Deputy First Minister, to close on behalf of the Scottish Government. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I want to begin by acknowledging the concerns that have been raised during this debate. The issue before us is indeed an important one. The role of public funding and the gravity of what has happened in Gaza, and I take these issues very seriously. I recognise the deep emotional and ethical considerations that have been expressed today, and I want to thank members from across the Chamber for contributing so powerfully to this conversation. Very few of us in here can even begin to imagine the depths of the horrors that we have touched on this afternoon. The events of 7th October 2023 and the situation which occurred in Gaza since are devastating. Far too many innocent men, women and children have lost their lives. The images are imprinted on my mind of small, lifeless bodies recovered from rubble, the same size or smaller in many cases than my toddler, each of them precious. Just as precious as the small, lifeless bodies in black coffins of the Bibas family toddlers being returned to their families. I was struck by something that Hamza Yousaf said recently, which I think captures it better than anything else I've seen. Every child in this world, Israeli, Palestinian, or any other nationality, deserves to grow up loved, safe and happy. And there can never be any justification for kidnapping or killing children. Ben Macpherson and Maggie Chapman talked about the impossibility of grappling with the sheer numbers that have been killed. And I visualise my daughter and imagine the pain of her death thousands of times over. And it's those children, both Israeli and Palestinian, who are the reason that Scotland stands firm in our commitment to peace and human rights. We have consistently called for a ceasefire, humanitarian aid to reach the people of Gaza, recognition of a two-state solution, the route to lasting peace in the region. And it's why the amendment lodged by the Scottish Government reiterates our support for a ceasefire and humanitarian aid, whilst also recognising our position that we do not believe that public funding should be spent on the manufacture of weapons or munitions. Despite that, I understand and recognise the questions that have been posed around the process that Scottish Enterprise operates in terms of a human rights due diligence in the awarding of any funding. And that is why we are supporting the line today that calls on us to review and ensure that the most robust checks are in place with regards to products' end use. I understand Lorna Slater's position that we have a responsibility to use all of our public funding in line with our values and in line with international law. Whilst it's been covered already that the exports and sale of arms are reserved, the limitations of Scotland's devolved powers doesn't prevent us from being vocal and active in calling for an end to arms sales that have contributed to the killing and the suffering of civilians. I do urge members to support the amendment that reflects that unwavering commitment to a two-state solution for lasting peace in the Middle East and the fact that no public funding should be going to supply arms to Israel. Hamza Youssef talked about the new world order, or disorder as it is. It poses a stark choice for us as a government and as each parliamentarian. We are accountable for our actions. The choices that we make either lead to peace or lead to greater disorder. And for the sake of those children, Presiding Officer, I call on us all to stand side by side in their defence.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. And I now call on Ross Greer to wind up the debate, on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In January of last year, 6-year-old Hind Rahab and 6 members of her family were fleeing Gaza City. Their car was bombed by Israeli soldiers. That initial bombing killed her uncle, her aunt and 3 of her cousins. Hind and 1 cousin survived. They called the Red Crescent for help while they were still under attack. The Israelis then murdered the surviving cousin, leaving Hind, a 6-year-old, trapped in a car surrounded by the dead bodies of her family members for hours on the phone to the Red Crescent. She and the paramedics who were sent to rescue her were then murdered by Israeli soldiers who attempted to cover that up. Their crimes were not covered up. They were reported on widely. They have been proven beyond dispute. She was one of tens of thousands who have been murdered by the soldiers of apartheid Israel. And the Green motion today is simple. Companies who are arming a country that is clearly and proudly committing war crimes and crimes against humanity should not receive a penny of public money in Scotland. This is not a new proposal. I met the Minister to discuss actions in this area last year. I have raised it at First Minister's questions, as have other Scottish Green MSPs. I have exchanged letters with Hamza Youssef in his time as First Minister. And the reality is this is the area that the Scottish Government can take action in. The vast majority of what we're discussing is, of course, reserved. But how the Scottish Government and its agencies spend their money is for them to decide on. There are areas like pornography, where the Scottish Government, of course, would not fund companies producing it. So clearly these kind of policy decisions can be made. And the Government must understand why it looks from the outside to be more than just a bit hypocritical to have such similar rhetoric when it comes to Israel and Russia and the crimes that these countries have committed, but the actions to be so different. Such an unequivocal call on businesses to cease trade with Russia, but not even a call, not even a ban on public procurement or on grants for the companies the United Nations has identified as being complicit in Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine. And again, the moral distinction, the policy distinction the Scottish Government is trying to draw between the funding for the manufacture of weapons and munitions and the funding of other activities by these companies is a semantic one. There is no moral distinction between funding the manufacture of bombs and funding a bigger bomb factory, as the Scottish Government did when it funded the expansion of Chemring's Scottish facility. The Labour amendment, I will admit to struggling with, because there's so much in it that I agree with and that I welcome and that I'm glad they've brought to this debate. But I struggle in particular with the first line about the UK Government's suspension of arms export licences to Israel, because the reality is that only 30 of around 350 of those export licences have been suspended. And I struggle with it because the leader of the Labour Party, the UK's Prime Minister, explicitly endorsed Israeli war crimes against Palestine. He endorsed the cutting off of water and electricity, the collective punishment of Palestinians. He won't even recognise the state of Palestine. But I do welcome Labour's proposal that we should review the system of human rights checks that not a single arms dealer has failed since their introduction. And I'm glad that Katie Clark put on record the reality of what is manufactured by companies like Leonardo and Raytheon with their facilities here in Scotland, and what that equipment and those weapons then do to Palestinians, Yemenis, Kurds in Turkey when it is sold to these countries. The Conservatives, of course, have given what we would expect, a robust defence of arms dealers, regardless of what they do and who they do it to. But I can't help but feel that they just wouldn't have done that if we were talking about Russia. If we had swapped out references to Israel to references to Russia, Palestine for Ukraine, which again brings us back to the hypocrisy. But I certainly won't take any lessons from the Conservatives about standing in solidarity with Ukraine, given that both myself and Lorna Slater have been sanctioned by the Kremlin. Indeed, on the same day that Craig Hoy accused us of having some kind of sympathy with him. No, Mr Hoy had his opportunity. No, thank you. And I respect Jackson Carroll and the contribution that he's made a number of times in this Parliament, but what I really struggle with today, what he left me with the impression of, is that he thinks the last 15 months were a price worth paying for Israel's existence, because there was not a shred of empathy for Palestinians in his contribution. Not a shred of it, which I find to be absolutely tragic in these circumstances. And Jamie Green asked us what our end goal in this debate is. It's very simple. Our end goal in this debate is for not a penny of public money in Scotland to go to arms dealers who are funding a genocide, who are equipping countries committing genocide. It is that simple. We simply want international law to be adhered to. And again, it brings back this difference between rhetoric and action, and that is where my frustration is with the Scottish Government's actions on this, because it's the SNP's MPs at Westminster who have raised many of the most critical questions of both the previous and the current UK Government, like the fact that they have only suspended less than 10% of arms export licences to Israel. But at the same time, the Scottish Government met with Israel's ambassador, an action it would not have taken with Russia's ambassador. It is the Scottish Government that will not ban companies identified by the UN as complicit in an illegal occupation from receiving grants or contracts here in Scotland, and it is a Scottish Government that continues to give public money to these arms dealers. Any human rights check that Raytheon can pass is not worth the paper it was written on. And I cannot understand this position that a number of members have said today. They do not believe that we should be funding companies who could be involved in a breach of international law. How much more evidence do we need, colleagues, that these companies are involved in breaches of international law? The State of Israel could not have made it more explicit what they are doing, and we know who equips them. It is Raytheon, it is Leonardo, it is BAE and the others. Today is our opportunity, Presiding Officer, to show that solidarity means action, not just words. To stand in solidarity with the people of Palestine, to stand in solidarity with the victims of any genocide anywhere in the world, we must cut off the supply of public money to the arms dealers who are fuelling these horrific crimes.
Thank you, Mr Greer. That concludes the debate on Scottish enterprise funding for arms companies. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business to allow front bench teams to change positions should they so wish. Thank you.